minutes after 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we're going to come to a thing we're going to do on Friday, but we got rather overtaken by events, namely Storm Eunice, actually. It's the question of who exactly are the Tories fighting in this culture war. That's the question. It's the headline on a column in a newspaper last Friday. Who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war? So you've got Oliver Dowden's recent speech to a particularly right-wing think tank in Washington, where he, got a photograph of himself doing the ironing. And then you've got Nadim Zahawi's instructions to schools about what is and what is not ideologically acceptable for people to teach in schools, and sundry other examples. And I'll take any answer. Who exactly are they fighting? 0345 606 0973 is the number that you need before we explore it a little further. Adam Hills, who you'll know from presenting The Last Leg on the telly, picked up on this yesterday. I saw it on his Twitter account. He tweeted, anybody else noticed how regularly the Telegraph Online has an article about how something they deem woke is destroying society? And then he just picked some examples from the last month. The woke onslaught is demoralising the Anglosphere just when it needs its confidence. Sorry, what, pardon? The woke onslaught is demoralising the Anglosphere just when it needs its confidence. It might sound like a simplistic question, what is the enemy? Or it might even sound rhetorical, like, well, there isn't one, or it's you, James. But I want you to pin it down. Who exactly are these people fighting in their so-called culture war? When will the woke crowd address the history of slavery in Africa? Asks someone called Michael Mosbacher. When will the woke crowd address the history of slavery in Africa? Okay. Another one. Society can't afford the dangerous decadence of the woke movement. That's by Andrew Roberts, a historian. Society can't afford the dangerous decadence of the woke movement. What does that even mean? And then Trudeau is world leader in woke liberalism. His coverage of the so-called truckers' crisis in Canada has been very interesting to see through the lens of right-wing British media, because none of it mentions what the public opinion is among Canadian people for breaking up these protests and the disruption caused to their lives by people coming over the border from America in large part with Confederate flags and pro-Trump posters. But Trudeau has, I think it's fair to say, become something of a figurehead of progressive politics, or a world leader in woke illiberalism, as someone called Eric Kaufman wrote for The Telegraph. And Adam Hills clearly got a bit stuck in last night because he found some more. How is anyone getting any work done in woke Britain? Asks one columnist. And the woke left is destroying the Anglosphere. That's Douglas Carswell. We've already had that one, Douglas. The woke onslaught is demoralising the Anglosphere just when it needs its confidence. And then, lo and behold, another article by another person. The woke left is destroying the Anglosphere. Cultural relativism is shattering faith in our nations and weakening the ties that bind us with our global allies. Another one. Justin Trudeau's woke agenda is tearing Canadian society apart. And finally, the woke push to cancel fairy tales lets daylight in to the magic. So everywhere you go, you find evidence of the woke mob or the woke people attacking something. So who are the anti-woke people attacking? Who is the enemy in this culture war? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And I mention it because it was reported yesterday that a wave of attacks on woke charities by right-wing politicians has actually backfired, generating an outpouring of public support for the targeted charities and helping to drive a surge in social justice activism. This is according to campaigners. There's a survey of the Sheila McKechnie Foundation with charities reporting huge concern over the chilling impact on civil society of a raft of proposed legislation designed to restrict public protest and legal challenge. You can see the way the newspapers have got Jolyon Morm of the Good Law Project in their sights at the moment. One newspaper yesterday carrying an absolutely absurd ad hominem. No prizes for guessing it was the Mail on Sunday. But if you need evidence of how worried they are by the work that the Good Law Project is doing in areas like a PPE contract apportioning, or indeed unlawful appointments of senior figures in government-appointed places, you only need to see how they get written about in organs like the Mail on Sunday. So a lot of concern about restrictions coming in on legal challenge. But I like this story because it suggests that outfits like the NHS, which was called Marxist and politically correct for publishing a report highlighting the slave trade links of some of its historical properties, have seen a big boost in support. The Runnymede Trust was accused of having a political agenda. They're a race equality think tank. Of course they've got a political agenda. Everyone's got a political agenda. Shredded wheat has got a political agenda, if you come at it from the right angle. Well, a race equality thing, oh yeah, down with race equality, that's a political agenda. This is a phrase increasingly that stupid people use. I don't know if you've noticed. Agenda and narrative. They say, well, that doesn't suit your narrative, or that fits your agenda. And you say, well, what is my narrative? And they go, wibble, blurp. And then you say, well, hang on, what is my agenda? What is the agenda you're talking about? They don't have an answer to that, or rather they do, but they won't say it out loud, which brings us back to political correctness, doesn't it? What do you mean when you say that? Well, what is my agenda? Well, James, you obviously think that people should be treated the same regardless of what colour their skin is or their sexuality, but you can't say that that's my agenda after you've tried to malign my agenda, because that would involve publicly admitting that you're homophobic and racist, and they're still not quite ready to do that yet. So that's my answer to the woke question. Who are the enemies in this culture war? People who think you should be treated the same regardless of your ethnicity or sexuality, gender or otherwise. And that's why the trans debate fits so neatly and conveniently into their rhetoric, because a lot of us still find that quite complicated, still find that quite difficult in ways that I don't find race equality or sexual equality or equal treatment of homosexuals in any way complicated. So that's why the whole woke thing is actually built upon continuing confusion regarding transgender issues. It's just my opinion. So who do you think the enemy is? Just let me know. You could use your favourite examples as well. 0345 6060 973. Who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war? Answer: people who think you should be treated the same regardless of your ethnicity or sexuality. If you've got a different answer to that, I'll take it. And if you don't like my answer, you need to tell me what yours is. So whenever you hear someone talking about woke, leaving out the transgender debate / conversation, okay, that's the caveat in this conversation. Talking about the National Trust, it's got nothing to do with transgender people. What exactly are you cross about when people are covering the National Trust's historic links to slavery, or some of its properties' historic links to slavery? Answer: well, ultimately, the more disgusted you are by slavery, the more convinced you are that people should be treated the same according to the colour, regardless of the colour of their skin. And if you don't like that, you're not comfortable with that, then obviously you're anti-woke. I find it fascinating because if you're a liberal in the purest and best sense of the word, you're quite reluctant, actually. I mean, you constantly get accused of thinking everybody else is racist, but you're very, very reluctant to believe it. But when I come to the woke debate, it's the closest we've come in my lifetime, certainly in my career as a phone-in host. It's the closest people have come to actually owning it in public, doing what Steve Bannon told them to do, and wearing the accusation of racism with pride. What other reason can there be for opposing kneeling footballers or the National Trust publishing information about the history of its own properties? What other reason can there be? Listen, that's not a rhetorical question. Maybe there is another reason. But when you actually boil it down to who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war, the only answer that fits the fact, as far as I can tell, is people who think that racism and homophobia and all the other isms are wrong. What other answer can there be? Who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war? Answer: all right, I'll give you a slightly more generous one. And I want your answers as well, or you can agree or disagree with me. I think, and this is the English answer to the question, who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war? I think I'm qualified to say this because I think I used to suffer from it. The way that we're taught history in this country creates an idea that there is something unique about us. I remember looking at the map of the empire and marvelling at how much of the world was red, how much of the empire we had conquered or overcome or occupied. And then you'd look back at the UK, all of the UK, and this tiny, tiny little island had somehow managed to rule the world. And, of course, you don't get taught about the Portuguese Empire or the Ottoman Empire or the Roman. We get taught about the Roman Empire because I think that's far enough ago for us not to think, well, that must mean that the Italians are a better species of humans than we are. So you just come away from looking and learning about the empire somehow convinced or somehow believing that something about being English is unique, not just an accident of birth, a chronological and geographical accident. We something particularly brilliant about us explains the empire. And if you then start exploring more deeply issues like slavery and exploitation, I think, and if I'm describing you now, I hope you'll feel welcome on the programme, I think you feel that something precious is being taken away from you. I'm thinking of me as a kid looking at that map and thinking, wow, we're amazing. Look, go us. Look at that. Britannia rules the waves. Whereas actually Britannia waves the rules. There would have been no empire without slavery and without exploitation and without epic theft from other countries. An absolutely appalling behaviour, at which point you go, oh, you're cancelling all the good stuff. No, I'm not. I mean, you know, stick the good stuff on a platform. Give it all the good stuff. All up with the good stuff. Go the good stuff. But this is my theory, and I'm fascinated by this issue. It is and especially when you get that question so right, who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war? They're fighting people that understand that the bit of rock you're born on does not imbue you with superpowers. And now think about Brexit and tell me I'm wrong. Look at all those people that I just read from Adam Hill's Twitter feed. Every single one of them a Brexit supporter, almost definitely. They talk about the Anglosphere because it's the closest you can get to being hugely racist without actually saying I'm hugely racist. What's the Anglosphere? Well, people who are more like us than they speak English, you know. Still Johnny Foreigner, but at least they speak the old Queen's English. It's so clear when you think of it like that. People believe. This is why also you will then get accused of hating your country. You see, if you merely point out that being born on this bit of rock has not imbued you with any superpowers. What makes you special is how you behave, not where you were born. What makes you special, what makes you valuable, what enhances your humanity is how you treat other humans. So this is James O'Brien's theory of woke, version 376. What or who exactly are they fighting? Well, they're fighting people who are making it increasingly difficult to cling to the notion that being born on these islands imbues you with some special quality. And that's a nicer analysis than the racist or the sexist or the homophobic analysis. So I give you that. 03456 60973. I give you that. Who exactly are Tories fighting in this culture war? Answer, people who are making it almost impossible to continue clinging to the idea that being born on this island gives you some sort of superpower. I'll tell you what, Keith, I think I've gone and solved it. 20 minutes after 12, if you're just tuning in, you won't be surprised to learn that I'm giving myself an almighty pat on the back. I think I've just solved the mystery of woke, why it's such a big thing. And leaving aside the transgender debate, which politicians are generally too cowardly to allow reasonable discussion. I'm confused. I find it confusing and very difficult, and every time I try and wade into it, I end up hurting someone, and I don't want to hurt people. So that's leaving that aside. The National Trust flavour of woke, that side of stuff, the Black Lives Matter flavour of woke, what is it exactly that people are so scared of and so angry about? I think the answer to that is they are scared of the knowledge, which is there somewhere inside, but they're not prepared to admit it yet. The knowledge that where you're born doesn't really make much difference to who you are. You can learn values and things like that, but in terms of being special, I guess it goes back to war. How on earth am I going to persuade you to go and try and kill that fella over there who's got a lot more in common with you than I do? I'm a king, for God's sake. Answer, cry God for England, Harry, and St. George. Jake's in Greenwich. Jake, what do you reckon?
Hi there. Yeah, it's a really interesting conversation. And,
it's only just started. Let's not get carried away.
yeah, that's very true. That's very true. But I do believe that there are, some really core elements to this whole woke debate that have been kind of used for essentially a very long time. And my opinion is these kind of conversations are created to really divide us.
Yeah.
They take elements of society, and they kind of capitalize on those things in order to distract people and make people feel apart and different to others.
The best line I heard was that if we weren't having a culture war, we'd be having a class war. And a class war, of course, would be in the interest of the massive majority of the population, whereas a culture war isn't really in anybody's interest except those who would be on the wrong end of the class war.
Absolutely. Well, we'll always find something to separate us from other people.
Yes, but that's true. But I suppose the question I'm asking today is a sense of why does it work? And the answer I've come up with is that because it's really precious to people, the sense that by dint of being English, they're somehow better than others. And that is so precious to them that pointing out that it's a bit daft is... Well, it's treachery. It's the worst imaginable offence. It's country-hating, leftish, woke nonsense, whereas actually it's just factual and logical, but that's why the reaction is so emotional.
Well, I do believe that there's some level of kind of profiting from the ignorance and profiting from people's fears of being silenced, fears of being kind of oppressed. And what this conversation really does is it really makes people feel like they are being targeted, that they are at risk. Whereas when you look at
But at risk of what? At risk of what? At risk of being the same as everybody else? At risk of... Of course it is, isn't it? Well, hang on a minute. I might not be able to articulate this, and I'm certainly not going to say it out loud, but I don't think everybody should be treated the same, because I've convinced myself, rightly or wrongly, that I'm on the right side of the discrimination. So why on earth would I want to give up my privilege?
Well, you know what? I think that the real risk that we're talking about here is, I think it's a risk of losing what you have. And I feel like in this country, we have this idea that we have something that nobody can take away from us, and we're so protective over it. And what this conversation really does is it kind of taps into our natural kind of protective nature.
Yeah.
This is our culture. This is who we are. And it really, if you were to...
That's why they need flags. That's why they need flags, because you can't really use words to describe what you're describing, and with a big flag you don't need words or explanations or facts. You've just got a flag and you jolly well salute it, or you can clear off.
I think the most fascinating thing about this entire debate is how it really gets people to it really takes tiny moments and it just extrapolates on a huge scale. I'm sure you saw that video of it was a sketch, actually. It wasn't even a real video, of a trans woman who was looking to go into a changing room, and it was a woman who came out. She was like, "No, I'm not having that woman in here. I've got my kids." And it completely blew up on social media. People being angry, like, how could she use this changing room? It wasn't even a real video, but it ignited anger in people. It made people feel something, and because of that, the media picked it up, and suddenly it was...
Amazingly, I didn't see that, although I do, for reasons that are pretty clear, generally leave the transgender debate out of this, because I think a lot of the responses that you might describe as extreme, I wouldn't necessarily. I think there are some of the arguments on either side of that terrible, febrile debate are valid. And of course, that paints two targets on your back. Now you come under attack from both sides. But leaving the transgender debate out of things, focusing, because there's nothing peculiarly English about that. For me, they've co-opted the transgender debate in order to shore up the stuff that is xenophobic or is exceptionalist. So what is it why would you be frightened about National Trust properties teaching a little bit more about the history of National Trust properties and links with slavery? Because the whole Britannia rules the waves mindset is built upon some form of spiritual superiority rather than just the fact that we behaved really badly in pursuit of making rich people richer. That's all it was. It's no biggie. Every other country under the sun has done it, from Mesopotamia downwards. The Roman Empire did it, the Greek, Alexander the Great. Why do you think Alexander the Great went off conquering everywhere? So that they'd pay him money, tax. It's everywhere. Every empire in history is essentially being built upon the promise of making rich people even richer, and some of it might trickle down. There you go, trickle down economics to plebs like us. That's all it ever is. But I guess if you can imbue it with a spiritual sense of destiny and superiority, then you can turn off your moral compass. Why you'd still want to turn your moral compass off 200 years later is, I guess, at the heart of the questions we're asking today. Angus is in Bethnal Green. Angus, what do you reckon?
Afternoon, James. Cracking show as always.
Well, you're very kind.
I think that because Brexit is such an unmitigated disaster.
How dare you?
Country.
Yes.
That they're using their mates as swivels on the right-wing papers to whip up this hysteria to deflect from the actual fact.
It's chicken and egg, isn't it, Angus? Because they need something. Even if Brexit was going well, they'd need a new enemy, wouldn't they?
Yes, well, it's the modus operandi of the current Conservative government. They got rid of the decent ones, and now they've just got a bunch of swivels in there.
It feels that way. Why does it work, though? Because why do perfectly nice, ordinary people end up convinced that the National Trust is their enemy?
I don't know. There's something peculiar in a certain part of the British psyche, so a certain part of the population that look for scapegoats.
Yes.
And it's easy to blame people with different coloured skin or religious beliefs or.
But I know, but I prefer. Yes, but actually, flipping it upside down, it becomes a less offensive analysis. It's not that you think. It's not that you're a racist or you just think that what you've got by dint of being born English. Was it Prince Philip who said, Ron suggested that in the lottery of life to be born British is to have won first prize. I don't know if it was Prince Philip, he was born Greek. But that's the point, isn't it, is that this is a prize. It's a pointless prize. But
English exceptionalism.
If it's the only prize you've got, then you're jolly well not going to let anybody take it away from you.
Yes, it's a fear as well, a fear of change.
Yes. Because the status quo you think suits you. And that's the great mystery of 20th century politics. Well, every century politics is, why are you in support of something that actually discriminates against you? Answer, well, because I'm still not at the bottom of the food chain, so bringing people up who are currently below me, well, it feels like oppression when you've lived your whole life privileged. Angus, thank you. I'm cracking on only because of the time. It's just coming up to 12:29. I may as well give you my other concern about this, which is that we fall into the trap by talking about it like this. So, there's a reason why they make these ludicrous speeches and publish this ludicrous guidance and attack these charities. The RNLI came under attack, didn't it, not long ago? Actual lifeboats came under attack from the rhetoric of the anti-woke mob. And you respond to it by pointing out how ridiculous it is. And in doing so, you perhaps inflate the conflict? By laughing at the culture war, do you inflame the culture war? I mean, it's clear I have a side. And therefore, simply by articulating my thoughts and position, does the culture war then get bigger? I don't know. But unless you've got a better explanation, so you consider yourself to be anti-woke, I'm asking you what that means, and you're anti-people or anti-ideas or anti-knowledge that challenges your perception of yourself as being special because of the place where you were born or where your granddad was born. 03456060973 is the number. 12:30 is the time. Amelia Cox is here with your headlines. It is 12:33. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think we've solved it. I mean, you won't be surprised to learn that I think I've made some astonishing discovery, and no doubt there will be hundreds of thousands of people listening to this who think that, hang on, James, I worked this out years ago. But it was Cecil Rhodes who said that thing about winning the lottery of life. In the lottery of life, to be born British is to have won first prize. And that's the whole point, isn't it? If that's all you've got, and even perhaps if you know deep down that actually what defines your value as a human being is what you do, how you behave, how you treat other people. It's got nothing to do with an accident, a geographical accident. But that's it, isn't it? How else do you get wars to be fought? How else do you persuade people to go and not just risk their lives, but lose it, sacrifice their lives on the altar of your political ambitions? It's incredible. You make them think that they're fighting for something spiritual. Cry God for Harry, England and St. George. And there it is. So what does anti-woke mean? Well, it means that I am passionately opposed to the idea that my nationality is not a really valuable commodity. My nationality makes me special. And, of course, that's supported, or at least it was for my generation, by the way we were taught history in schools. I could go on forever about this. I love it when... how many times have we talked about this? And I've had a real proper penny drop moment today. And it came from turning around the lazy, more obvious analysis, which is because they all seem to be quite racist, these people. And when they use words like Anglosphere, they're saying it quite a bit out loud. And the dog whistles are so clear. And the government announces there's no such thing as institutional racism, commissions a report. But actually, look at it from the other angle, not about what people hate, but about what they treasure and what they value. That's why the word exceptionalism is more helpful than xenophobia in this context, although they both contain the letter X, as does the word context. You have to be listening earlier to realise why that's not a mad non sequitur. That's what it is. Is that special feeling, that little feeling I got as a schoolboy when I saw how much of the map was red in the 19th century, and it made me, quotes, proud to be British, end quotes. So the last thing that little 12-year-old schoolboy would have wanted was to be made aware of exactly how so much of the map ended up red, because the more aware you are of exactly how so much of the map ended up red, the more aware you will be that actually there's nothing special about being British or French or German or Mongolian or any of those things. And, of course, every country thinks there is, whether it's Germany or Russia or France. Oh, it's so important to be... And I guess this makes me a globalist, does it? Or a rootless cosmopolitan, as the saying goes, or a citizen of the world, as Theresa May said, and therefore a citizen of nowhere. Oh, this is a lovely moment. I really feel as if... Remember those magic eye pictures when we were kids? You stare at it for long enough and you'd see the image that was hidden in all the squiggles. I can see it now. It's a bloody great horse. There it is. 12:36. Don't spoil it for me by ringing in and making me feel stupid. John's in Putney. John, what do you reckon?
Well, I think at the end of the day, it all boils down to insecurity and fear.
Yes, kind of. Although they're negatives, whereas having a largely unfounded pride in your geographical accident of your birth is not necessarily insecurity and fear.
I think the problem is, and this goes back again to the kind of way in which history was taught. It's taught less today.
Yes.
And I was part of a generation going back quite a long time to the era when we were working on stuff like British declinism, as it was known in the 1970s.
Okay.
This is something that's been kind of swept away, and it doesn't happen anymore. It's all gone. But it's with us today. And we have to remember that our comparative decline set in 1870.
Yes.
It wasn't last week. It wasn't sort of hippie 60s teachers. It wasn't the war. This was all going on long, long ago. The empire was too big to sustain itself.
Like all empires. It eventually sort of like a black hole. It implodes on itself, doesn't it?
They literally collapse under their own weight.
So why now? Why 150 years later why are people so frightened of facts?
I think because this nation has uniquely avoided a kind of fundamental reset that so often takes place in other countries. We can look at Germany after the Second World War.
Yes.
We can look at France in 1789 and the changes thereafter. We have not had a popular revolution. We have not been defeated in war. We've somehow managed to cobble it up together.
So we can still cling to the notion that we're special in a way that so a post-imperial reckoning has not happened here.
No, even after Suez, we were basically told quite bluntly where to get off in 1956.
Yes.
It was interesting that there are parallels with Ukraine today.
Well, there are. Macron is negotiating
the British and the French cobbled together an excuse, a kind of false flag operation involving the Israelis to evade the Sinai, as an excuse to take back the Suez Canal.
And why then, what is it you get? Why don't you and me have this? Why do I not feel any need to bolster my self-image with a flag or a picture of the Queen?
For some reason, it may be upbringing, it may be all kinds of quite complex factors that means that you tend to sit slightly outside the mainstream.
I don't know. I think maybe the woke is the mainstream now, and that's why the anti-woke are getting so spooked, because the fringe is becoming the mainstream. Most people are going to recognise the reality of empire. The more they learn, the more it. So actually, it's privilege feeling like oppression.
I think the reason is that the mainstream is not yet in power.
Yeah.
There is still a sufficient weight of power within, if you like, in other regimes we call it the old guard.
Yeah.
We use some kind of similar expression. Here, we don't do that. We're afraid to confront things by saying kind of the old guard, the state, or whatever. We couch it in all kinds of separate, different phrases. But it means that we're avoiding the issue all the time. And we've been kicking it down the road for literally 150 years or more. And
the so-called anti-woke or the culture war is an attempt to kick it still further down the road. I like that a lot. I really do. I like this as well from Matt. He writes, "Nice to see you figuring out something that the Welsh, the Scottish and the Irish noticed about 1,200 years ago, James." Yeah, all right. Well, better late than never, Matt. Thank you, John. Gabby's in Sittingbourne. Gabby, what do you think?
Well, I think that your last caller actually came pretty close to nailing it. I think that we've not actually come to terms with that here in the UK. Now, I'm from Puerto Rico, so our experience of empire is the Spanish Empire, which again was really, really big. And I was told from the beginning, how big it was and how amazing it was that Christopher Columbus discovered America. Yeah. But because Spanish isn't the global language, whereas English is, I think that kind of bolsters this sense of exceptionalism, because we can still see it in the fact that our language, English, is the language of science, is the language of business, is the language of commerce, is the language of diplomacy, whereas the Spanish saw that stock go down. Yeah, you see, and so
was the end of the Spanish Empire a very sudden event? Was it? Okay.
Well, it kind of. I mean, it was kind of. It was kind of fraud, and for us it was kind of fraud because Puerto Rico got caught then by the Americans.
Right, yes.
You see?
Yes.
So we were about to declare independence, like Cuba, our sister island, and then the Americans came in and nipped that in the bud quite violently. Okay. So for us it's a little bit complicated. So Spanish, the language and the culture, is kind of in resistance and antagonism to the American cultural imperialism.
Yeah, okay.
While at the same time being our oppressors. You know what I mean?
I do, yes, no, I do. But I mean, it's like a slowly deflating balloon would be the British Empire, whereas for other empires it popped.
Yeah, exactly.
It got
and
burst.
The other thing is, and I think that then you find yourself in the situation where, what I thought was wrong. I don't like that. I'm not comfortable with that. And and that's something that I think the reason why you find it easier to be in this position of being critical of history, and I find it, is because we've become more comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't like that feeling that they're being told, no, my history is wrong, or, oh no, my feelings are wrong, or what I thought was true is more complicated. And we have like a human kind of
self-protection almost mechanism, isn't it?
I don't want to be wrong. I don't want to be thought of that I've been treating people wrongly all my life.
Yeah.
Gosh, that's awful. And so we bristle against it. Now, if we don't have, if we haven't had the experience in a way as a nation, as the previous caller was saying, like Germany, like Spain, where they've found themselves collectively in this position, then it becomes more personal and it becomes more visceral, because it's they're telling me that I was wrong and that my mom was wrong and that my grandfather was wrong.
Gary points out that he's got family members who are on completely the opposite side of this debate than he is. So that's an example of, it's not just nurture, is it, or upbringing or environment. Ben in Leicester says, I'm born in 1995. I've always been force-fed by my parents that what we now call woke is bad. It involves something being taken away from me. But some of us just don't feel that way for a whole variety of reasons. Yeah?
Yeah, well, we're more comfortable with interrogating our position in it.
Yeah?
So we're more comfortable being wrong.
Is it because, Gabby, is it because we are a little bit more pleased with ourselves? We're a little bit prouder, perhaps, of what we've done in our lives and who we are, and we don't need to derive our sense of value or worth from 200-year-old events and a completely mythical notion of spiritual superiority.
Yeah, and I think it's also got to do with the fact that because we tend to think we tend to ascribe value more to kind of
behavior,
how we relate to other people, exactly, how we relate to other people rather than history. So we're like, well, okay, so that doesn't, just because I interrogate the past and say, "Oh, that was wrong," doesn't mean to say that I'm throwing everything in the rubbish bin. It just means that my perspective shifts. And I think a lot of people, with all the uncertainty and the changing face of the world, are finding themselves very uncomfortable with the idea of shifting position.
And the harder, the more you
solid.
And the more, yes, of course, that, because even if it's not actually solid, the illusion of solidity is incredibly comforting and reassuring. And then I don't know enough history. You see, I don't know about the end of the Spanish Empire. Probably involved Napoleon. Did it involve Napoleon, Gabby, the end of the Spanish Empire?
No.
No, there you go. I told you I didn't. Thank you, short and sweet. It's 12:45. Thank you very much indeed, Theo. 12:54 is the time. Back to this question, or indeed this solution to the mystery of what is woke, or indeed who is the actual enemy. And it seems pretty clear that what people are terrified of and very furious about, and it goes back to that Cecil Rhodes quote, appropriately enough, Cecil Rhodes, who was in many ways the beginning of this little culture war. It's the idea that you're having something very precious taken away from you when you are essentially taught or reminded that there's nothing special about any nationality or country in the world. They've all at various times, or many of them have at various times had empires and successful campaigns, but we've never really had the wake-up call. We've not with a bang. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Julian's in Marlow. Julian, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello.
Firstly, do you want to carry on the discussion about the effect of the Napoleonic Wars on Spain's loss of the empire?
If you feel that you're the man for the job, Julian, I'm all ears.
Well, unbeknownst to you, because you can't tell it from my accent, I am born to Spanish parents here in the United Kingdom, so it's a little bit of a background to me.
No, tell me more.
But yes, Napoleon did have an influence on the loss of the empire because Spain was taken over briefly by Napoleon, and basically created enough turmoil in Spain for them to kind of lose focus and not wish to pursue matters further afield because they had enough stuff to deal with back at home. It wasn't that they lost it in a battle, although the British did do a fair bit.
Yes.
But there just wasn't the political will to
there you go.
because they'd had enough guerrilla warfare already on their own Iberian Peninsula.
No, there you go. Well, that's not what you rang in for, though.
No, that isn't what I rang in for, but you could say it's kind of linked.
Yeah, well, it is.
We've had it for decades, for centuries. We've always, the British, and I consider myself British despite not having an ounce of British blood in me or any genetic traits from the British.
Same here.
Touche.
Yeah.
Well, we're originally... Well, you don't look as much Spanish as I do, though.
No, well, I'm Irish, so I'm not going to look Spanish.
I know,
it could have been the Armada. Exactly that. Who knows? There's always those rumours, isn't there? Or those claims that there was an Iberian strain running through the Emerald Isle. But anyway, carry on, because we're going to run out of time. And although you're being fascinating, I can't steal Sheila's show.
It's just to say that... the British have always worked best when there is an external enemy, an other. So you go back to Shakespeare, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone, etc. All that stuff.
Course, yes.
It served us very, very well during the Second World War because we didn't have to worry about enemies within. Everything was focused on the enemy without, and we coped admirably well. The world's best cures, and no one will take that away from us. For decades since joining what became the EU, people have wanted to make something out of the enemy, the EU, the other.
Yes.
So focus any dissatisfaction on the EU. It's the EU's fault. The EU are responsible for this. Bendy bananas, sausages not being called sausages, etc.
Also, the sense of decline that is real and palpable, but which is a source of epic denial. So, if it wasn't for the pesky EU, we'd still be... The map would still be pink, not red, as I suggested many times.
You can pick... It serves multiple purposes.
Doesn't it?
It has served every regime throughout history to paint the other as responsible. Margaret Thatcher was at a low point in her political career. The Argentinians decided to do something silly like attack the Falklands. Hey presto, she rises up through the ranks, becomes firmly cements her reputation as the Iron Lady, and we all feel good about ourselves because we beat Johnny Foreigner.
And if you haven't got a real war, here's a culture war.
Here's a culture war. Precisely. We are no longer part of the EU, so now they are the other. We are now responsible for our own destiny.
And we're being held back by the woke mob.
There you go.
We've done it. You brought it in. 30 seconds to spare. So who is it? It's the people who are refusing to let us persist in the belief that we're somehow special and amazing and incredible and all of those things, and they are the woke mob. It used to be Brussels. There it is.
It's just the other. If it's not the
I get
EU,
it. No, exactly.
Any
old other. Any old other. Thank you, Julian. As I say, you brought us in with 13 seconds to spare. I shall be returning to this theme with a similar air of the self-congratulation that I've managed to bring to bear for most of the last hour. Thank you.